The problem began with a single harmless porch swing attached under a modest awning at the front of the narrator's home. It was a simple wooden swing, carefully sanded and stained to give the home a warm, welcoming feel. It was the kind of feature one expected in peaceful neighborhoods with tall maple trees, slow weekends, and the occasional friendly neighbor waving during an evening walk. It wasn't extravagant, imposing, or visually disruptive. It merely swayed, catching the breeze and offering a resting place after long days of work. Yet in the world of homeowner associations, even the gentlest features could trigger unnecessary conflict. The narrator first noticed something was wrong when a bright yellow violation slip appeared on the front door, almost glowing in the morning sun. The HOA had declared that the swing violated structural appearance rules, citing language so vague it could have been interpreted a dozen different ways. They insisted the swing disrupted community uniformity and created visual clutter, two accusations that seemed exaggerated even by strict HOA standards. The narrator attempted to ignore the absurdity of the complaint, believing reason might prevail. The swing had been mounted safely, inspected by a licensed contractor, and carried no real risk. The design was minimal and blended perfectly with the exterior of the home. But the HOA was not interested in logic or fairness. Within a week, they escalated the issue by issuing a formal notice demanding immediate removal. The notice threatened daily fines and even hinted at legal action if compliance was not achieved. What should have been a simple backyard relaxation feature suddenly turned into a symbol of control. The narrator realized that the HOA board, particularly its newly elected president, known among neighbors for obsessive rule enforcement, had taken personal issue with the swing. Residents whispered stories about her crusades against garden gnomes, mismatched mailbox colors, and even a child's sidewalk chalk art. She treated the neighborhood as her kingdom, and every home as her domain. Instead of becoming frustrated or intimidated, the narrator found determination building beneath the surface. The pettiness of the violation awakened something else, a drive to respond with strategy, not anger. If they were going to escalate over something so trivial, then the narrator would respond in a way they could not foresee, could not prevent, and certainly could not undo. Thus, when the swing was reluctantly taken down to avoid mounting fines, a new idea began forming. One that would transform the house, the street, and the HOA's illusion of power. A bigger vision replaced the disappointment of losing the swing. If they wanted to ban one small thing, then they would soon be forced to stare at something incomparably larger. And as the narrator reviewed property codes, architectural allowances, municipal permit guidelines, and state construction rights, the foundation of a far bolder plan settled into place. Something was about to change in this neighborhood, permanently. The narrator's calm exterior hid a meticulous storm of planning. The HOA had used their rules as a weapon, but the narrator discovered something far more powerful. The HOA did not control city permitting. Local government regulations superseded their petty bylaws, and within those regulations lay a loophole so large and unguarded, it practically invited creativity. The narrator spent evenings studying building codes, reviewing historical architectural allowances, and contacting contractors who specialized in porch expansions. The HOA rules were strict about swings, pods, hanging objects, and anything attached in a suspended manner, yet they said shockingly little about full structural additions to a home, especially ones that met city code and carried fully stamped and approved permits. It was as if the HOA assumed no one would go through the trouble. That assumption would soon prove catastrophic. The narrator drew inspiration from traditional southern homes with sweeping wraparound porches supported by thick columns and wide decking that encircled the entire structure. This design was not merely aesthetic, it was bold, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. It symbolized comfort, elegance, and spacious freedom. More importantly, it provided the perfect place for not just one swing, but multiple swings hung from beams the HOA could never challenge once approved by the municipality. The contractors were amused yet enthusiastic when the narrator presented the idea. They explained that the expansive porch would require new footings, extended roofing, reinforced support structures, and complete integration with the home's current design. The narrator, fueled by the memory of the condescending violation notice, approved every detail without hesitation. The first step was securing the building permit. The process involved submitting the architectural drawings, paying fees, and allowing inspections before and during construction. The professionals handled everything with clean precision, and after a few weeks of back-and-forth paperwork, the approval arrived. A bright green permit card was affixed to the front window, a symbol of victory before a single board had even been placed. When the narrator stepped back to admire the permit, a deep satisfaction settled in. The HOA could not override city authorization, no matter how much they hated the project. They had trapped themselves by focusing on small things while ignoring the bigger picture. The narrator knew that construction would attract attention. Heavy equipment would rumble through the street, lumber deliveries would stack in the driveway, and work crews would swarm the property daily. The HOA president, who had grown used to controlling every detail of her surroundings, would soon have front-row seats for a display of her own unintended making. Everything was in motion, and the narrator did not intend to slow down. The porch would soon rise, and with it, a message too large for the HOA to silence. Construction began at dawn on a humid Thursday morning. The sound of diesel engines echoed across the quiet cul-de-sac, scattering birds into the sky. Neighbors peeked through blinds as a large flatbed truck backed into the driveway carrying stacks of lumber, concrete bags, prefabricated columns and pallets of decking material. Another truck followed, dropping off metal scaffolding that clanged as workers unloaded it. The narrator stood calmly on the lawn, arms crossed, watching the operation unfold exactly as planned. It didn't take long for the HOA to react. Within the hour, the HOA president arrived, practically marching toward the property with a tightness in her posture that signaled disbelief mixed with irritation. She watched workers mark the ground, drill holes for footings and erect temporary support structures. Her expression shifted from confusion to dread as she realized the scale of the project. Word spread quickly across the neighborhood. Some residents walked by slowly, impressed. Others lingered at the sidewalk, whispering. A few privately enjoyed seeing the HOA president lose her composure. Construction continued day after day. Posts were cemented into place. Floor joists extended outward, tracing the future outline of the massive porch. The crew worked efficiently, and with each phase completed, the house transformed in ways the HOA president could neither stop nor influence. City inspectors made routine visits, stamping approvals on the permit card. The narrator made sure the card remained visible, almost glowing with legal authority that shielded the entire project from interference. The HOA attempted to send notices claiming neighborhood disruption, aesthetic concerns, and even excessive labor presence. But none of these had standing. The narrator simply placed a copy of the city permit on a clipboard near the entrance so anyone attempting to challenge the project would be met with official documentation. The president's frustration grew with every beam raised. Her attempts to maintain control slipped further with each newly added section of porch flooring. The construction crew, uninterested in HOA politics, continued working at a steady rhythm, creating a scene too large for the neighborhood to ignore. Meanwhile, the narrator felt a growing sense of triumph. What began as retaliation had evolved into a beautiful, functional addition that genuinely improved the home. The swing had been taken away. But now, something much bigger was being built, a structure the HOA would have to live with permanently. Weeks passed, and what started as lumber and concrete now took the shape of a sweeping Southern-style architectural statement. Columns rose at precise intervals, supporting broad roof extensions. The porch wrapped around the house seamlessly, connecting the front yard, side yard, and back deck into one unified outdoor space. The HOA president watched helplessly as her worst nightmare expanded across the corner lot. She made several attempts to call emergency meetings, insisting something must be done to halt this growing monstrosity, but every member she approached reminded her the city had already approved it. She had no regulatory power left. Neighbors visited more frequently now, not to complain but to admire. The narrator welcomed their curiosity, even if only through quiet nods as workers hammered, drilled, and sanded the final boarding into place. When the last section of lattice was installed and the porch railing wrapped around the home in a smooth sweep, the narrator felt the kind of satisfaction that only comes from winning a battle without ever needing to argue. The HOA president submitted one desperate letter to the board claiming the porch violated community harmony. But the board, already tired of the escalating drama, dismissed her claim. They knew the project was beyond the HOA's authority, and the more she fought, the more she embarrassed the organization. On the day the crew completed construction, the narrator stood on the freshly finished porch and looked around at the wide, open space. It was perfect, elegant, expansive, and unmistakably permanent. But one final step remained. The narrator retrieved the swing, the very same one the HOA had banned, and hung it from a thick supporting beam on the new porch. The structure was city-approved, fully compliant, and far more robust than the original attachment point had ever been. The HOA had banned a swing. In response, the narrator built a porch designed to host 10. And there wasn't a single thing they could do about it. The porch quickly became a neighborhood attraction. families walked by in the evenings to admire it. Some asked about the contractor, curious about installing their own additions. The HOA president, meanwhile, spiraled into a state of frantic frustration as her influence weakened. She attempted to propose new rules at board meetings, restrictions on porch sizes, limits on roofing material extensions, and even movement against porch-related encirclement. But every suggestion was rejected. The city permit had already established precedent, and the board knew that passing new rules would expose them to legal challenges. The president's demeanor deteriorated as she watched the neighborhood slowly shift away from her strict ideology. Residents began loosening up, adding flower beds, installing Adirondack chairs, and decorating their entryways more boldly now that the narrator had unintentionally become the spark for a quiet rebellion. The narrator, however, remained calm and detached from the politics. The porch had been built for comfort, not spectacle. Each evening, the swing moved back and forth gently as the sun dipped behind the houses. The narrator sipped lemonade, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood slowly reclaiming a sense of individuality the HOA had suppressed for years. The HOA president eventually submitted a resignation, citing irreconcilable differences with the community's evolving aesthetic values. It was a formal way of admitting defeat. Her rigid control had been undone by the same rules she once used to dominate. The porch stood as a monument to the balance between personal rights and imposed limitations, a beautiful reminder that the smallest acts of defiance, when backed by knowledge and patience, could reshape entire systems. And the narrator knew the story wasn't just about a swing. It was about reclaiming space, reclaiming authority, reclaiming peace. Months after the porch was completed, the neighborhood felt different. The tension that once hovered around the HOA's strict enforcement style had faded, replaced by a quiet comfort that spread from home to home. People became friendlier, more willing to sit outside, and more open to personal touches that reflected their identities. The narrator's wraparound porch became more than an architectural feature. It became a symbol of possibility. In a community once controlled by fear of minor violations, it stood for strength and autonomy. It told a story of someone who refused to accept unfair treatment, not through anger or confrontation, but through strategy, patience, and creativity. As the seasons changed, the porch adapted to each new chapter. Autumn brought pumpkins and lanterns lining the railings. Winter added soft lights glowing against the frosted wood. Spring brought flower baskets swinging gently in the breeze. And summer transformed the porch into a cool, shaded retreat where the swing, yes, the very swing that started it all, moved steadily in the warm air. The narrator understood that the battle had not been about a single swing. It had been about a deeper conflict, the attempt by a small group to impose unnecessary restrictions on people's lives. The porch was the answer, a quiet but undeniable message that homeowners still had rights, voices, and the ability to shape their environment despite the pressures of controlling organizations. Years later, new residents would hear the story, how a simple porch swing sparked a massive project that reshaped the entire HOA. The tale would become a local legend, a favorite among neighbors and a cautionary example for anyone attempting to abuse authority. And every time someone walked past the narrator's home, they were reminded of the victory built board by board, column by column. The narrator continued to sit on the swing, enjoying the peace earned through creativity and perseverance. What began as a petty HOA violation ended as a permanent improvement, one that stood long after the HOA president, her rules, and her enforcement tactics were forgotten. The porch remained, the swing remained, and the narrator remained, quietly triumphant.